All right, gang, this is going to be fun. I guarantee it. Today, my guest is Chase Jarvis. Now, I'm guessing you already know, but Chase is an award-winning artist, an entrepreneur, and one of the most influential photographers of the past decade. And I don't say that lightly. Seriously, if you don't know him, look it up. He has created campaigns for Apple, Nike, Red Bull, and others. Plus, he's got one of the best podcasts out there called the Chase Jarvis Live Show. You need to check it out. And I guarantee you'll be compelled to do it after this interview. He's also a contributor to things like Pulitzer Prize winning, the New York Times story Snowfall. He's earned an Emmy nomination for his documentary Portrait of the City. He's created the wildly popular app called Best Camera, and he's the founder of CreativeLive, where more than 10 million students have learned photography, video, design, music, you name it, business, from some of the world's top creators and entrepreneurs. Chase's new book is called Creative Calling, and it's set to be released later this month. It's going to be amazing. It'll be huge. I got to check out an earlier and advanced copy, and Dream Think Doers, this book was written for you. So be sure to grab a copy of this. Today, we're going to talk with Chase about his journey, but we're also going to talk about how you can release, reawaken, reignite that inner creative. And you can do that whether you've ever considered yourself a creative or not. It's going to be good. So let's get to this. Chase, welcome to Dream Think Do, buddy.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. Really, really appreciate it. And I want to just inject two things. One, love what you're doing. Love the community you've built around this vision. And two, when you said that, I mean, I laughed out loud. I don't know if that's going to be on your intro, but when you said it was written like for your people.
It is.
And I had my own experience and the experience that I think you've built around Dream Think Do, like that. It's a very, very common but misunderstood vision that we can dream big for ourselves, and now more than ever before, we can craft the living and the life that we want for ourselves in a way that we couldn't. And we've got new tools, we've got new opportunities, and we haven't really been told that this is possible in a holistic way. And I think we get a bit from here, a bit from this community, a bit from that. And I'm just trying to do whatever I can to wrap my arms around. And I think it is really perfect for the tribe that you've built. So
it's so true, gang. And we talk with a lot of authors, but this is one where it's just a standout. I'm like, oh my gosh, Chase was thinking of us. So I love it. Now, one of the questions I have though is you were one busy dude. I mean, I read off the pedigree, and seriously, gang, just try to keep up with Chase. It's amazing. But you're one busy dude. Like, your dance card is full. Why was it important? Because I know you're all about intentionality. Why was it important for you to write this now?
Such a good question, and a question that I asked myself many times, because I didn't want to do it now. It was something that it was something that had to happen, and it had been inside me for a long time. And I think part of, two things. One, the book is not a book that tells, that comes from some of this omniscient place of
right.
First you do A, then you do B, then you do C. Life is perfect, and it gets even more perfect.
And in 30 days or less, you will have all that you dreamed.
Right. And so it came from a very nonlinear world where I made so many of the mistakes that people who are listening have made in their life with relationships, or with, I had $100,000 in student debt. I did the things that everybody else wanted me to do rather than the things. And these are people that I love. They said, oh, you should do this and this and this, and this is going to equal a good life. We just take all this feedback and we try and cobble it together to make our way through this messy thing called life. And a handful of things happened to me that unlocked a new path. And then I started looking backwards and connect the dots, and the information was there all along. And we start to realize that it was there for me, and I didn't grab onto it. And then I looked at the lives, and you mentioned my podcast and CreativeLive, where the world's top creators and entrepreneurs, share their stories. And wait a minute, there's like a pattern here. And not only is the pattern really pronounced if you sort of deconstruct it, but it's repeatable, and it's more available to us now than ever before, based on shows like yours and information that's moving on the internet. What's tough is to synthesize all this. And I didn't want to write a book. I've done, I've got hundreds, if not thousands, of videos on the internet. CreativeLive is a great place, and it's where millions of people go to learn about a lot of this kind of stuff. I needed to do it in a book for a couple reasons. One, because it's a long form way to live with an idea and chicken scratching it and listen to it, highlight it in your Kindle, whatever, and revisit it. And it's I think trying to, let's just put it this way. It was a trip to be doing the creative product of writing a book while writing about creativity and how to live your dream life. And here I was doing those things, and I kept having to take my own medicine, which is, if anything, that's validation that it works.
Exactly right.
The book is actually out in real life.
Principle. Absolutely. And probably, I would imagine, as you wrote it, if you ever violated some of your principles, you felt it immediately. It's like, okay, proof concept here.
Totally. I paid dearly for it. But again, I think it's a good package, a little bit of a Trojan horse, because you mentioned this earlier about creativity. I think for people who are listening right now, there's a range of how you identify on the creative scale. Yeah. And I want to be clear just up front here that art is nice, and it's only though a subset of creativity. And I'm talking about art, and I'm talking about daily creative practices, but not only in that sense. I think about writing code, having a family, cooking a meal. All these things are building a business, creating a podcast, building a tribe around what you love. All those are wildly creative in their own nature. And yet we really haven't been programmed with that. We've been taught to believe that creativity is a very narrow subset of things for a special group of people, and they wear berets and they move to Paris and none of those things.
I don't have sleeves. Exactly. Yeah.
And none of these things are how creativity is characterized in the book. To just be upfront, creativity is present in every human. Yep. And it's an innate skill that we have. It's an innate habit. It's an innate mode of operating that we have as humans that that separates us from all the other species. We can put two things together to form something new. And that is true whether you're cooking a meal, baking a cake, or building a business. And when you start to think of creativity in that larger sense, you start to go, okay, then maybe I am creative, despite what my teacher told me, my parent, my job. And the cool thing is, if you believe that everyone's creative in that capital C way, what you should be able to understand is that, okay, creativity is also like a muscle, like so many other things. The more you do it, the better you get. And if you believe 1 and 2, the big kicker to the book is that it's in acknowledging that we are creators, and that by creating meals and businesses and by pursuing the things that we love, that we actually realize that we have not just agency over these small C things that we're creating, but this is the same exact muscle that we use to create our life.
Yep.
It's just creativity at a different scale.
Yep.
And to me, that's the mind blower here, is that, wait a minute, but you mean by learning to play the guitar, or building a family, or cooking meals, and being intentional about making it fun and playful, that I can become a better doctor, that I can become a better parent? And the answer is yes. Yeah. And you'll realize that, you're not a cork bobbing in the tide. You are able to create the life that you want. And in fact, the lives of everybody you look up to or respect or appreciate or admire, their life was created. It was crafted. It isn't something they just fell into.
Yep.
So you can too.
I love that. Well, that's one of the things, as I was reading through the book, I think, it'd be easy with creative calling and to know, your background, your history. It's like, oh, this is for painters and sculptors and photographers. For sure. But immediately you drop in, and what I loved was your authenticity. You just were real, and invited people into the journey to help see, oh, wait, you mean he wasn't born with a camera in his hands? It's like, no. Oh, wow. That's, and I think also what is so inviting and welcoming to this is there are so many wildly creative people out there that never identify themselves as a creative. Yep. But this book is really going to help them. Like you're saying, it's going to help to just really reawaken that, because I think we're all born with it. Like, it's a part of our DNA. We just lose it, whether it gets buried, whether it's get beat up. Yeah. And it is. The application is obviously can be applied to career. It can be applied to art form, but it can be applied to so many other things.
It's well said. And like the part that to me is, I think, was the biggest head scratch when I started looking at this is like, and it had to be a book, to go back to your original question, is like, these are things that we're not told. And it seems like, as I'm writing this, it seems like a radical idea, when I told my agent, I'm like, this is what I'm writing on. I have to get it out of me. It was just like, this is radical. This is, and it just comes to find out that the more people I've interviewed and over the process of writing the book and having, had so many people on my show and millions of people that are in Creative Live, you start to realize like, no, this is, everybody thinks this and no one's saying it.
Right.
Like, I want to do that.
One of the other things I think what you're doing, and Seth Godin's one of my favorite writers. Saw you endorse the book as well, which is fantastic. But it's one of those that it's like, Seth labels things. Like, he does so many things well, but he labels things. And I think you were able to put names to things in this that help even the that person that thinks of themselves as non-creative to go, wait, that is me. You're helping to reshape that thinking just even through some of the labels. Now, speaking of that, what I also loved was there was some tangibles, right? Like sometimes when people think creativity, it's like, oh, rainbows and butterflies and cotton balls and all. No. This is like real stuff. So, you got 4 steps in here: imagine, design, execute, amplify. And I mean, throughout, you even pull in one of my favorite quotes of all time from John Cleese: creativity is not a talent, it is a way of operating, right? It's like, oh my gosh. So these 4 steps really do, obviously you inspire, but you're giving some tangible things. So since we have 4 hours, we're going to go through all 4. Now, we're just going to focus we're going to touch on the first 2, because I really do want to give people, because a lot of dream think doers already see themselves as creative, but everybody has a bad day. Right. Yep. And it could be that some of our listeners are thinking, God, I don't know that I'm definitely not doing Pulitzer Prize winning, Emmy winning documentaries, all these kinds of things. Right. So let's talk about imagine first. Let's talk about that first step. Sure. And even diving into some of those things that you're helping to call out that creative.
Sure. I think I want to take 30 seconds and talk about each of the 4. So at the base, these are steps in the book. I believe these are steps to literally building anything. And this is after deconstructing my biggest successes and what was missing from my biggest losses. Yeah. And deconstructing the lives of other people that I admire and respect and have been on my show and Creative Live. And they all follow this pattern. Imagine what's possible, whether it's you want to, write some code or bake a cake or whatever, imagine what's possible. Or your life. So imagine, then design a set of behaviors and circumstances to get you there, execute against that vision, and amplify. So I think for your community, focusing on the first 2 is really important. I might throw a wish list that we make sure to just at least touch on amplify, because everybody knows what it means to execute a plan. But if we focus on the I and the D, these are well, let's just talk about imagine. So when I say imagine, most people, myself included, for the first 25 years of my life, never, I had individual aspirations and I thought that, oh yeah, sure, I want to win the state championship at soccer. I want to get an A in math or whatever. Yeah. But we are not taught to think big enough. And we're taught that thinking big is foolish, that it's naive, that it's where dreams go to die. And obviously not with your community because it has it in its name. But I just invite people to think in an unconstrained way and give us a simple, basically break down some of the barriers to take this limited or fixed mindset away and start thinking about a growth mindset. And if you really could imagine what you want for this project that's right in front of you, or in the macro for your life, what would it be? Mm-hmm. And what I find is so many people, and myself included, you get on this hamster wheel of doing the things that everybody else tells you, like, oh, you got to go to this school and get this job. And if you do, you'll make this much money. And then you have this many kids and you have to, there's just this prescription. And what I realized talking to people and living my own life is that actually is just a formula for average. That creates, if all these inputs, you balance them all out, you don't piss anybody off, you just stay in your lane, you get an average life with average highs and lows and average emotion, average connection, average income, average fulfillment. All these things are averages.
We say that turns you into the grays, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. You're just, I use beige. You're beige. Right. And yep. And it's important to say that I'm I was doing that. I am the result of that. And then that I managed to figure a way out of that. I'm living proof that the system works, but B, that like I'm not especially smart. I'm reasonably hardworking. I care.
Mm-hmm.
And I was only able to like identify those things when I was just able to get out of that hamster wheel long enough to say, wait a minute, what have I imagined for myself?
Yep.
And I started to think like, certainly haven't been thinking big enough, because I'm thinking that, well, I got a mortgage and I'm married and all these constraints. You know what? As soon as you actually you free yourself of some of those constraints that you have to bring into consideration at some point, but not in the dreaming phase.
Right.
That's
Exactly.
in the doing phase and the
Yep.
planning to do.
Yep.
So to me, the front part of the book is about teaching us how to think big and in a way that is in line with our true nature as humans, to connect and be fulfilled and not just like be a cog in a machine. What's possible? And it turns out that the lives of the people that you admire and respect and appreciate and look up to, they thought pretty big for themselves.
Yep.
Even if they're just large in a small community, that was their aspiration, and they fulfilled that. That's part of what you resonates with them, or sorry, with you about them, right? They imagined something for themselves and then they went and did that thing.
Yep.
You can too.
Yep. I love that. Well, it's one of the things we talk about with Dream, Think, Do. Hopefully it's a catchy name, but it's also 3 steps, right? And so much of what you talked about with the imagine step is what we talk about with Dream, Dream,
Yep.
Think, Do, is that
the parallel's not lost on me.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Like,
it's amazing. So it's like,
yeah.
but the dreaming has to be separate than the thinking. I think dreaming gets poo-pooed like, oh, it's just out there. But it's like, it is so important, like you're saying, to imagine without limits before you start to think and plan. Because if we start to think and plan too early, we just get incremental thinking. We get those little changes, where if you give yourself that permission to imagine, as you're saying, and like without limits for a while, obviously coming back to building systems. I mean, you talk about that specifically, but you gotta give yourself that permission to imagine first. And I love the tangibles of that, to be able to hear that in your story, but to be able to say, all right, these are some of the things you can be doing. I mean, to hear your call, to walk your path, to stand out.
Yeah.
So, when you're talking with somebody and you want to inspire them to imagine, right? Maybe it's one of those that like a lot of people are already leaning in. They got you. They're like, Chase, I'm with you. We're good. All that. But I know there's a couple of people who are like, gosh, it's been a while since I've given myself permission to dream. And we're not talking about people that aren't successful. There's a lot of successful people that you're exactly right. They're like, wait, I did a lot of what people told me to do, but it feels like it's a long time since I thought about my dreams. So what do you recommend? Like, what's one of the things you suggest people do to give themselves that permission to imagine, especially if they haven't done it for a while?
You have to have a mindset that allows for it. And part of the if your experience of life is directly proportional to the quality of your thoughts, right? Garbage in, garbage out. You think poor, you are poor. So to me, there's a lot in the book about mindset. And the cool thing about mindset is it's something that we can all change in the comfort of our home, on our commute, during a run. You don't have to go to Harvard. You don't have to do all these things with a bunch of barriers. It's really about how can you make for yourself a fertile ground to start farming. And that is your brain. And you can put yourself in a creative mindset and create this openness to new ideas. It's amazing what a lever that is. And I'll confess something. This is not in the script. I'll just say that.
Prepare yourselves, people. Buckle in.
You said you really admire Seth Godin.
Yeah. I
was on the phone with Seth at where it's here at 2:44. I was on the phone with Seth at 1:00.
No kidding.
And actually I was on a Zoom with Seth at 1:00. And I won't give you the details, but Seth reminded me to imagine what was possible. And the irony was that I'm in the middle of this, launching this book. It's the biggest thing I've done in 10 years. And it's all I'm thinking about or talking about. And even I can forget or become distracted to the place of limited thinking. And so if you're in a position, this is like to a listener right now, if you're in a position where you're realizing that, shoot, I'm really not, I'm not thinking big for myself, and like, it's okay. And this is a practice. This is why it's like, establish a daily, the subhead of the book is establish a daily practice, infuse your world with meaning, and succeed in work and life. It's because it's a practice. We're all wandering from it. And I'm not trying to advocate perfection, because we're going to all fall short of that. But
right.
It's more about when you find yourself in a position where you're not doing, any of this sort of stuff that I prescribed, that's okay. It's sort of like meditation. When your mind wanders, all you got to do is bring it back to your breath or back to whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so, one, I want to come from a place of vulnerability and say that the cool thing about the book, and B, the picture that I'm trying to paint is it doesn't require that you're perfect, and take into considerations all of the inputs that are happening to you. And again, you have a mortgage and you don't have to move to Paris, and you don't have to have a huge set of oil paints in the closet. That's not at all what we're talking about.
Yeah.
It's just in small daily ways, starting to acknowledge that you have this creative power, teaching you to harness it in very, very simple ways and be mindful of it and aware of it. That just creates an entirely new outlook on life and what is possible.
It's so true. And I love that permission. Well, one, I appreciate the authenticity and vulnerability too, to be like, and I think that is that thing of, we all need to be reminded, even the author of the freaking book needs to be reminded that we need to continue to imagine, right? And then give ourselves that permission. So I love that. And way to go, Seth. How crazy is that? Wow. That's cool. Yeah. But what I really appreciate that is it can start small, right? So our ability to dream big does start small.
In fact, that's the only way it starts.
Right. Exactly. Especially if it's been a while. Right. Yeah, and that's so many of us. And what I love is the book is so honoring of even, successful people need this. I think in some ways, successful people need this more, because so often, right, success can be so dangerous, because then we start to get in this mode of, I can't change anything. I don't want to break anything. I don't want to risk anything.
You now have something to lose, right?
Exactly right. Exactly right. And then we wind up losing all that they've got in them, because they start getting smaller. It's like, I think these are the kinds of things that are going to help to set them free. And we got a lot of successful people who are like, all right, you're nailing me. You got me. Yeah. So let's talk about it. Like we've talked about starting the process.
Sure.
And giving yourself that permission. But let's talk about that next step. And I do want to, I'm with you. I want to jump to amplify just a little bit. But let's talk about, I really do love, one of the things you honed in on is develop systems.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think so often, you just referenced it. So often people are like, I can't move to France. My kids are in school. I got a job. I've got 2 car payments, whatever. But you're like, no, it's not major shifts. It's setting up systems. So give us an example of what you're talking about there, especially when it comes to design.
Sure. What you're doing in the design phase of this process and this section of the book is you've imagined what's possible for yourself, and you've put some big ideas maybe on paper or in your brain, or that you aspire to reach, recognizing that nothing happens overnight, but also realizing that, and this is what I found in deconstructing my own life and the life of so many people, is that you're really just a handful of decisions away from an entirely different life.
Yeah.
The distance between where you are and where you want to be, it might be, far in miles, it's not 2 weeks or 2 months, maybe it's 2 years, but the decisions to put you closer to that, they can be made in an afternoon. And in fact, they're all made in just a moment. Right. And to me, that's also a powerful framework to think about it, because then it comes down to tactics, and you're designing. That's the section of the book is about designing the behaviors that are going to get you the results that you want. And just at a very simple level, you want to, run a 6-minute mile. You don't just get off the couch and run a 6-minute mile. You get off the couch. You have to decide, all right, how am I going to spend the next month so that I can, at the end of the month, run a 6-minute mile?
Right.
And I use this as a very blunt and simple, as a simple lens of thinking about it. But the cool thing is it's not any more complex, whatever your target is. You're just designing a set of behaviors that will put you there. And where I think people misstep and fall down is they believe, as we've been conditioned to, so don't beat yourself up over this, that you have to have a map, that you have to see where you are, and you need to see all the steps that you're going to take in order to get to the red X.
Yes.
And the reality is that there are no maps for the kind of stuff that you're trying to do.
Right.
because you have your own set of circumstances. You mentioned the car payments and the kids, and where is there a handbook that tells you if you have XYZ PDQ that you have to take these steps to get what you want? There is no map because there's so many individual circumstances. But what you do need to do is you need to take the first 3 or 4 steps.
Yep.
And that's very, very prescribable, which is what we talk about in design. You don't need to see the whole map. What you really need is a compass, because a compass is just directional, right?
Yep.
Okay, a compass that says I need to go north, and north is going to take me over those hills. And when I get to the top of the hill, okay, cool. I got to go around that lake, and then I go to that next valley. And it's not the map, because you only could see the valley and the water when you got to the top of the hill. Mm-hmm. So what we need is, first of all, then this is, I think, this is material. It's, you have been taught, we all have been taught to ignore our inner compass, or at least put it in check. Yep. Intuition, oh, that's whimsical, and why would you, make sure it's rational thought? And what we know to be true, the science is unmistakable, that rational thought is slow, it's laden with bias, it's got all these sort of trappings. By contrast, what's fast, intuitive, immediate, and has the knowledge of the entire body rather than the brain, which is just a 1,000,000-year-old organ that's not designed to make you happy.
Right.
It's designed to keep you alive.
Keep you safe.
It's looking for saber-toothed tigers. That just happens. There are no more saber-toothed tigers, and our brain thinks that our Instagram count and our car payment, those are saber-toothed tigers, but the reality is that they're not.
Yeah.
And sure, it would be uncomfortable to miss a house payment, and no one likes to put anything out in the world and have no one like it.
Right.
But the reality is we're not going to die in either of those situations. We need to reprogram ourselves. And part of reprogramming is listening to that piece of ourself, not the brain, but the whole body. Mm-hmm. When you have a gut instinct, you look backwards, and there are moments in your life where you were very connected to what you're doing, where you loved, you said, how could I possibly just do this over and over and over again with these people in this place? We all have experience of this, however fleeting. Maybe it was our childhood, maybe it was the previous job, the previous relationship. I'm asking you to pay attention to that feeling that you had in those moments and use that as a compass for what to do next. Mm-hmm. You can call it curiosity, you can call it exploration, you can call it intuition. All these words will be fine, because at the end of the day, what I'm really talking about is what's in here. The answer's not out here. That's where all the shoulds and the oughts, and those are never going to go away. They don't go away for me or for you or for any listener.
Yep.
We just have to get better at listening to our heart rather than our head. And once we start to listen to our heart, that path becomes clear. Not all the path, the first 2 steps. And in the book, I use a metaphor of hearing that call. That's the thing that tells us where to go. And that's, we've had this experience, whether it was like, man, I loved real estate. I remember when I bought my first house, and then I sold it, and I realized how much money I'd made. And now here I am, waiting tables. And what if I could, maybe buy another house and flip it? But like, I'm not trying to be prescriptive of what the thing is, but we all have a thing that sort of, and sometimes many things that have sung to us, but we've been taught that they're impractical or unrealistic or naive to pursue them for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And the reality is, it's actually naive and wrong to not listen to your gut.
Right.
And to pursue the thing that everybody else wants you to do, because how many people are pursuing that? Everybody. And what the results of everybody doing something? It's beige.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, especially in the era that we live in too, because it's one of those things where it's like, it used to be that we were definitely restricted by our geography. We were restricted by the people that were in our town, all of those things. But it's incredible as we start to tap into those experiences, those things where like, I felt alive, I felt flow there. How do I do that more? We don't necessarily have to wait to accumulate a degree, or we have to wait for somebody to give us permission. I mean, I just talked with somebody who created a $10 million company yesterday, and he's like, yeah, pretty much YouTube videos got me there. Like it's one of those, I was like, did you get your degree in that? And he's like, no. He's like, I just kind of thought about what I thought was needed, and then I watched a bunch of YouTube videos and I just created it. It's like, I mean, and how many different stories of that are on CreativeLive with you? How many different people said, all right, I found something I was passionate about. I either self-taught or I went and pursued an education in that. But so often, especially in the era that we live in, I mean, I love the era we live in. We got plenty of our problems, but I love indoor plumbing. I love air conditioning. And I mean, what we have access to is incredible. So especially as you're talking about, listening to that call, but to be able to say, all right, especially if you start to get pinged by, but I don't know. It's like, yeah, you probably know enough to take that next step. And you certainly know enough to say, all right, what can I learn? Where can I learn it from? All of those things with the tools that we have.
And those end up being these initial steps that you don't have to know the whole thing. You just have to pull on that thread that is your curiosity. Yep. And whether it's real estate or building a $10 million business or anything, when you start to listen to that and you start to pull on that thread, things reveal themselves. Yeah. And the cool thing about, I think, intuition is that when you trust it and it pays off, you're like, okay, maybe I'm going to trust this a little more.
Exactly. That's kind of addictive. I like that.
And it does. You talked about flow earlier, and I think that's a really one of the premier thinkers on flow is a guy named Stephen Kotler, and he's a dear friend. And we've talked so much about this book and how related to flow it is, because that is the part, that the intuition part that we all know to be true, but again, culture is telling us that we shouldn't pay attention to it. And I started asking the reverse question, like, okay, I'm not supposed to pay attention to it. What am I supposed to pay attention to?
Yeah.
And the results that came back were, the stock market, your mind, what your mom said.
Your news feed. Yeah, exactly.
And they're really bad answers, it turns out.
Yep. They're definitely common answers, right?
Totally.
They're not the best answers. Yeah.
For sure. And that reveals itself. So, if we bring it back to designing this life, that's the cool thing about this step in the process, is that you're designing something that's very custom. And the school system and whatever job description and those things are not custom.
Yeah.
And when you start to design something specifically from you, what your gifts are, what your interests are, where you are in the world, who your relationships are with, it starts to be empowering rather than limiting. You say, wait a minute, this is an advantage. And the fact that I do have an internet connection, that I am able to watch videos from the foremost expert, whether on CreativeLive or anywhere else in the world, and start to build up a little confidence and a little more knowledge than I had before I started this process, that I never really understood what learning was. Like, I understood school, and that's, you want to get a good grade.
Right.
But when you start to realize that you want to build something, like with this podcast, you probably Googled, how do I podcast?
Right.
And the concept of gathering knowledge when it's around a thing that you care about, it becomes completely different. That's, this is like, this is actual learning.
Right. I'm not doing this for a letter grade. I'm doing this because I'm passionate about it, or I'm curious about it. And that really is, that's a whole different type of learning that is so much more satisfying too. It's so much more rich.
Yeah.
And I love that. I mean, that speaks to obviously anything you're creating, but it really speaks to life. And I think that's what you're getting at with this book, is that this applies to career. It applies to relationship, but it applies to how you want to live your life and leave a legacy, right?
Yeah.
Powerful stuff.
Yeah. And that's, I think, to keep bringing it back to the macro, the cool thing is that it's when you start doing these things on a small basis, on these daily basis, and with things like deciding to pursue, you don't maybe have to have the whole business in mind, but I want to start making money podcasting. So what do? You start podcasting.
Right.
You don't go straight from the idea to 2 days later you have an audience of 0 and no sponsors and whatever your vision is for your podcast. But what you do is you start to like, I'm going to get curious about this, because step one of this is having a podcast. And when you pursue that first step, and again, the most important thing for me, and I believe that this is why in the name of your show, you have a couple of words together, because just thinking or just pontificating is very dangerous.
Yep.
If you've got a notebook full of notes, that's awesome. But what if you haven't actually put any of it in action? It's dangerous, right? So I talk about action over intellect. If you want to know something about podcasting, you start researching podcasting. That's taking an action. And then when you've researched enough, the next step is to record a podcast. Right. And so many people just get stuck in the thinking part, which is why I really align with the name of your show. It's so tightly aligned with the framework for my book. It's just uncanny, right?
Crazy.
the cool thing is just that know that everything around you was designed. Every chair, every life, every piece of furniture, art, every home. The first way it came into the world is usually as a sketch or as a picture in a mind. And this to me can be a reminder that if all these things are designed and I have the capacity to design, why don't I get to work designing?
Yeah.
And that notice the operative word is get to work.
Exactly.
Because you've got to put in some effort. So,
and you got to do, that's exactly right. You got to get after it. And that I do love, I know one of your mantras is to create something every day, right? Like you got to create something, and it doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be a statue, but create something every day. And that is so, so powerful. So I know I want to just real quick. And again, I'm so glad we've got 4 hours. I'm just kidding. We've got about 4 minutes left, but I do want to speak to amplify. I don't want to disrespect execute. We've started to talk about taking action. That, the doing part is probably my favorite part, right? So the execute is huge. And I think Dream Think Doers are all about that, but the amplify really is, I think that's in some ways, maybe even one of our missing pieces of the Dream Think Do model. So amplify doesn't necessarily mean look at me, or, hey, everybody, look at what I'm doing. But it does matter. So let's just talk about the concept. When you say amplify, your fourth step, what are you talking about?
I believe that the place where most people fall short of their dreams is in this stage. I do think we're not taught to dream, so there's a lot of peril there. But for the people that have taken those initial steps, and I'm just going to paint a picture here. You did a presentation for work, or if you are a podcaster, you did your first podcast and you put it out into the world, or you're a designer and you put forward a design on Kickstarter and nobody bought your new watch or whatever the thing it was. You've done a bunch of work and you put it out there in the world, and what comes back is crickets, nothing. Right? Tumbleweeds.
Exactly.
We've all done this. And you're looking at someone else and you're like, wait a minute, my fill in the blank is way better than their fill in the blank. Why do they have all this traction? And you start questioning yourself and looking around and judging and wondering. And the answer to all these problems is simply community. So amplify to me is a substitute of what a community does around an idea. And there are a couple different types of community, right? There's communities that we join, that if you want to learn about podcasting, or you want to connect with more, you want to become a restaurateur, or you want to build a business, there's all kinds of organizations online in real life that we can participate in. And notice it's not just join, because joining implies sort of like doing, think of it, and then sit back. Participating in that community. And when you start to participate around people that are doing the same thing as you are, you'll learn more quickly. You're able to shortcut a lot of the painful processes because you can get feedback from others and people that are in a similar position. It's just a powerful, not just motivator either. It's a powerful learning tool. What you're also doing is you're beginning to create an audience and or a community around your own work. So there's communities that we're joining, and I go way into that in the book, but there are communities that you're starting to build around your work. And this does not mean X millions of people on Instagram.
Right.
If you're a blacksmith, the example I use in the book is if you're a blacksmith in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, you can have an audience or a community of 12 restaurateurs, and they all get all of their knives from you, and you take care of them and you hone and sharpen that steel or whatever your thing is. It's not about volume. It is about building an audience for your work. And in this case, for you, it's a podcast. For me, it's the book or whatever. And it just so happens that after you've deconstructed the work that the most successful people are out there, it just turns out that about half of the time that they put into working is community building in some way. We're taught that if you just do great work and you put it out in the world, it's going to win. Great work wins. No, great work is the price of entry.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And then you're told that, oh, do great work and then promote it. And like, okay, if you do great work and you promote it to a bunch of people who've never heard it from you and never heard this idea, or let alone never heard your name before, there's a real gap between them hearing about it and then picking it up, because you're just promoting it. You're just pushing an idea. What you find out is the foundation of success is bringing other people along on this journey with you.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. It's not a volume play. It's a quality play. And if you built a community and an audience who's ripe for your work, and you put something out there, you get things like human connection, feedback. You get people who are willing to spread the idea because you think in the same way that they do, or similarly, or you've inspired them in a way that they've never been inspired before, and they're excited to share your idea. That's how ideas create momentum. So to me, it's a place where most of us fall short. I was victim to that really early on in my photography career, and it's just a very common, and it's easy to see why, because we're sold this idea that great work just stands out. Right. It's just not true. And you can chronicle any famous artist. You were not told the story that, Da Vinci used to have to work to get people to love his stuff. Ansel Adams used to sell his photographs for 25 cents to appear in the menus in Yosemite Valley. Wow. Yeah, it's these are not things that you're told. And when you start to look at the work of the most successful people, community, and in the way that I think about it is amplifying your idea through other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's creating that tribe, it's creating that connection. And what I love too, though, is that in what you're talking about too, this is a very two-way relationship, right? It's not just look at me, look at me, look at me. It is actually bringing value. It's bringing those gifts. It's bringing your message, but also really connecting and making sure it's a two-way thing.
Totally.
Which is so powerful and a whole lot more fun, right?
Way more
and
fun.
A lot more sustainable as well.
And we are social animals. Even if you identify as an introvert, extrovert, right, doesn't matter. Human connection, it's not just a nice to have. If we do not have human connection, we die. Yeah. Arguably, it's at plague levels, isolation, despite being more connected on the internet. And to me, this idea of community, not only does it help your ideas spread, but it makes you feel like we're biologically wired. Our DNA is wired to connect with other people. And if you start to participate in these communities and build one around your work, not too different from when you start to listen to that intuition, you feel this momentum start to build. That's the function of a community versus waking up on the first thing in the morning, putting yourself in the backseat, scrolling through Instagram, looking into everybody else's highlight reels, right, and comparing it to your real life and your 2 car payments and all the other things, all the other trappings that we
right,
talk about.
Right.
So, the flip side of that would be to connect with your community, connect with the people, and this is not just online; it's in real life as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, people in rooms together. Yeah. So
amazing,
so powerful. All right, so I've got one last question for you, and that we always ask for one last wisdom of the week, and that is, what's one last thing, especially to that person? They're like, Chase, I am with you. It's been a while, but I'm going to commit. I'm going to imagine. I'm going to dream. I'm going to do it. But what's one last thing that you want to send them off with to help push them through that? I'll let you think about that. So, gang, the book is called Creative Calling. Establish a daily practice, infuse your world with meaning, and succeed in work and life. We've been talking with Chase Jarvis. Just Google the man, but you can go to creativecalling.com, chasejarvis.com, and definitely go to creativelive.com. It will blow your mind. You'll be glad you did. So, Chase, what do you think? What are you going to send us out with, man?
I believe deeply that what you're doing, if you're paying attention to the ideas in this book, it's very much in line with your show, is you're refusing to betray that part of you that recognizes that you have one life. Oof. And it's not intentional. There's no evil genius. There's no one who's there's no puppeteer, but just the pressures and constraints and realities of mass culture, they have us in a headspace that is, we need to be like all these other things. And the average of all those things is just an average life. And that's not what we're put on here to do. We're put on here to create, to develop ourselves, to connect with community, to put love out into the world and have impact on our own experience and the experience of others, happiness, joy, all these things. And the foundation to this is being able to listen to what your script is and then execute against that vision. Like that is the path to not betraying yourself. And the number one data point of the dying is that they listened to other people way too much and they didn't write their own script. So I'm asking your listeners, like, at the end of the day, is that what you want for yourself? Or are you willing to take a little bit of ownership, create some daily habits that put you in a place to win? These are not huge changes. These are small, teeny steps that down the road can have a massive difference in the outcome of your happiness and ultimately your life.
Amen, brother. Preach that.
Preach. Maybe a little dramatic, but it's such a dramatic question.
Right on. I'm buying what you're selling. Okay. I love it. All right. Well, Chase, thanks so much for being a part of the Dream Think Do, man.
Thank you for having me on the show. Love this community. And I do think it's uncanny that some of the sections of my book are so in line with this community and even the title. It's just, it's unreal. So
that's, I'm like, man, it is written for us, man. Written for us. So thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it.